The crowd at Incheon International Airport held their breath as Jin disappeared through the security gates, his figure swallowed by the sterile, fluorescent-lit corridors that lead to another world. Fans waved, cried, whispered prayers into the air, but none could have known that behind the scenes, something even more heartbreaking was happening, a moment so intimate, so raw, that when it leaked later, it shook armies around the globe. Hidden from the cameras and the flashing phones, Jin's mother stood near a private lounge, disguised in a simple black coat, clutching a small bouquet of white lilies. Witnesses said she looked proud, but there was something else too. A quiver in her hand, a tear she fought desperately to hide. As Jin moved further away, swallowed by the security procedures and formalities, she finally turned her face away from the crowd. She couldn't hold it anymore. She cried at first, no one dared approach her. Even the most devoted fans knew some moments were sacred. But among those nearby was an old friend of Jin's family, an elderly woman who had quietly accompanied her that morning. And it was to this trusted friend that Jin's mother, still shaking, finally whispered the words that would later spread like wildfire across fan communities. "He carries too much alone. I wish he didn't have to be so strong all the time." The confession wasn't meant for the world. It wasn't scripted. It wasn't a polished interview line. It was a mother's deepest pain, leaking out in a moment of unbearable vulnerability. And when fans heard it, the emotional impact was immediate and overwhelming. Around the world, armies flooded social media, not just with support for Jin, but with a renewed outpouring of love and sorrow for the quiet battles he must have been fighting, hidden behind the dazzling smiles and effortless performances. Hashtags like #ProtectJin, #JinsMother, and #YouAreNotAloneJin trended for hours, carrying messages that blurred the line between fan and family. "He always smiles for us.
He jokes.
He comforts us." One post read, retweeted more than 300,000 times within a single night. "We never knew how heavy his own heart was." Another fan wrote, "Hearing that from his own mother, it changes everything. We see him, we love him, and we will be here when he needs us." But the story didn't end there. According to the same eyewitness, after speaking those heartbreaking words, Jin's mother wiped her tears, straightened her coat, and smiled, a small, trembling smile, as if gathering every ounce of strength she had to send her son into the next chapter of his life without burdening him with her fears. It was a gesture armies recognized instantly, because it mirrored Jin's own resilience, the way he always bore his struggles quietly, choosing instead to laugh, to love, to protect others first. It wasn't just a mother's strength. It was the same quiet courage Jin had shown the world for years, now reflected perfectly in the woman who raised him. In the hours that followed, deeper layers of the story began to emerge. Some fans uncovered past interviews where Jin spoke tenderly of his relationship with his parents, how he worried about making them proud, how he often shielded them from the harsher realities of fame. "I don't want my family to worry about me," he once said during a tearful broadcast. "I want them to think I'm always okay." Now, knowing what his mother whispered, those old words carried a heavier, almost unbearable weight. Speculation also grew about the timing of Jin's departure. Why had he flown to Japan so suddenly alone, just weeks before his second solo album, Echo, would drop? Was it really just about business, promotions, or filming, as fans initially believed? Or was there a personal mission, an emotional pilgrimage that Jin had to undertake by himself, carrying invisible burdens even his bandmates and team couldn't share? Theories ran rampant. Some fans pointed to Jin's famously strong sense of responsibility, how even during BTS's hardest times, he often played the role of the stabilizer, the cheerful older brother who refused to let anyone see him break. Others wondered if Echo itself would finally reveal the truth he had long kept hidden, the loneliness, the pressure, the dreams deferred for the sake of millions of fans who called him worldwide handsome, but rarely saw the quiet man behind the global icon. Meanwhile, Jin's mother remained silent, refusing all interview requests and declining to make any public statements. She had spoken her truth once, in a whisper meant only for a friend. It was not hers to repeat. It belonged now to the wind, carried by the hearts of those who understood its meaning, and somewhere over the Pacific, aboard a plane cutting through the morning sky, Jin sat quietly by the window, the city lights shrinking behind him. Perhaps he thought of the album he was about to complete. Perhaps he thought of the fans waiting desperately for him. But most likely, he thought of home, of the woman who had loved him enough to let him go, even when every fiber of her being wanted to hold on, For all the glamour and spectacle surrounding his career, at the core of Jin's journey remains something achingly human. A boy who became a star, a son who became a legend, and a family who, in the end, just wanted their child to be happy. And as the world holds its breath for the release of Echo, one thing has become clear. Behind every note, behind every lyric, behind every tear shed quietly on a flight to Japan, there is a mother's whispered prayer that her son will no longer have to carry the weight of the world alone. Maybe Echo won't just be an album. Maybe it will be Jin's long overdue answer to that prayer, and when it finally arrives, it won't just be armies listening. It will be a family, waiting with open arms, hoping that this time, their beloved seokjin will let them share the burden he has carried in silence for far too long. Hours after Jin's quiet departure, the ripples of his mother's whispered confession continued to spread across the globe, wrapping armies in a bittersweet embrace of understanding they had not fully grasped before. What was once merely a photo of Jin leaving for Japan had transformed into something else entirely, a moment of generational love, sacrifice, and heartache that even global fame could not shield. Fans began digging deeper, not out of idle curiosity, but from a desperate need to piece together the unseen parts of Jin's story, the ones hidden between headlines, interviews, and public performances. What they found only made the emotions heavier. In a 2018 magazine interview, Jin had once spoken, almost offhandedly, about how his parents rarely interfered with his career. "They trusted me to choose my path," he said. "Even when they were scared, they didn't stop me." At the time, fans celebrated his words as a sign of freedom and family strength. But in light of his mother's tearful whisper, those same words took on a heartbreaking new dimension. Maybe his parents had trusted him because they knew they had no choice. Maybe they stayed silent because they understood the price of chasing a dream, a price they knew their son would have to pay largely alone. As the hours passed, armies also resurfaced a lesser-known anecdote from BTS's early days, that during Jin's trainee period, when life was a relentless blur of rehearsals, evaluations, and brutal uncertainty, he once considered giving up, not because he lacked talent, but because he feared he was burdening his family emotionally and financially. IT was his mother, he had hinted quietly once during a live broadcast, who had told him on the phone, "Even if you fail, you will never disappoint us. You are already enough." The revelation, buried deep in the archives of fandom memory, now rose to the surface, like a hidden star finally breaking through the clouds. It wasn't just that Jin's family loved him, it was that they had given him unconditional permission to fall, to fail, to be human in a world that demanded perfection. And now, years later, as Jin embarked on what many believe could be the most vulnerable project of his career, that same love burned fiercely in the background, unseen but unyielding. Meanwhile, whispers of Jin's activities in Japan began to solidify. Reports indicated that he was not only filming new material connected to Echo, but was also participating in an intimate documentary-style project chronicling his emotional journey post-enlistment. Not a glossy, scripted reality show, but a raw, soul-bearing portrait of the man behind the music. Sources hinted that the documentary would feature never-before-seen footage, Jin writing lyrics alone in a sunlit room, struggling through vocal rehearsals, walking through unfamiliar streets with only his notebook and his thoughts for company. There would be no script, no filters, no armor. Just seokjin, the boy who loved to laugh, who carried the grief of distance from his family and fans, and who now sought to find his voice anew. For many armies, this revelation triggered an emotional landslide. They realized that Echo might not just be an album about triumph. It might be an album about survival, about carrying wounds unseen, about holding on to hope even when loneliness presses down like a physical weight, about answering, finally, the unasked prayers of a mother who only ever wanted her son to be free, not just successful, but truly, unconditionally free. It is perhaps no coincidence that the symbol associated with Jin's new album is a wave, an echo traveling across distance, time, and silence, reaching shores unseen. Because that's what Jin has become for millions of fans worldwide, a wave of comfort, strength, and healing that carries across oceans.